This is a show about getting spooked for fun, and neither one of the hosts are associated with the attractions discussed in any way, except for those skeletons in Devin's closet. Some topics may go from ghoulish to ghastly, so viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to the Great American Scream.
Adam.
Yeah?
I have good news and I have bad news.
Uh-oh, what should I ask for first?
Well, that's up to you, really.
Okay. I'll take the good news first.
Okay, the good news is I have a new boyfriend for you and me. The bad news is he's a giant worm monster with lots of tentacles and lots of eyes, but not where you'd think. But the other good news is that he's a good friend. But the bad news is he's horribly powerful and will destroy the world.
Can I see him? Can I look at him?
Only in
Can
your
I look at
mind's
this
eye.
boy?
Only in your mind's eye. In the
What
evening
happens if I get a
hours.
peek at this boy?
So here's the thing.
Okay.
If you see him, the world has already ended.
Okay.
But you also feel like eternal happiness in this moment. And whether or not you live in this moment forever or whether you live in eternal darkness is really up to the philosophers and not for us to decide.
Okay. I'm glad that you took this moment to explain to everybody firsthand why cosmic horror doesn't work visually.
Yeah. Well, also, this is an audio medium. Like, what was I going to do? Draw you a picture and show it? I can't show the audience.
Hey, everybody.
Let's see what the audience thinks. How did you like this intro bit, Adam? Did you like it?
I liked it. I did.
Okay, thank you.
I will say I fell right into the trap of trying to picture that lad, but that's the opposite of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, opposite. Hello, and welcome to the Great American Scream. I'm Devin Wright.
I'm Adam O'Connell, and today we are going to talk about the horror subgenre of cosmic horror.
Ooh,
which sounds
and I know what
like,
you might be thinking.
Yeah.
Oh no, they're going to talk about that Garbo man who belongs in the toilet, H.P. Lovecraft. And it's true, we are going to talk about him, but he's dead now.
Yeah,
and not in like the death of the author way, just like he's literally dead in the ground, so we don't have to we have to engage with what he was thinking when he wrote it, but we don't have to engage with him.
Yeah, because here's the thing about H.P. Lovecraft in the sense of cosmic horror. There is no denying that his not only influence on the genre, but basically his work invented the genre of cosmic horror and had a huge influence on the entire genre of horror today. Like the idea of the unfathomable, something that you can't see or comprehend, being far more horrifying than something you can see is what I think a lot of people consider to be truly scary and was a trope that was codified and invented by H.P. Lovecraft. However, that does not mean that he wasn't a terrible racist stink man, because he 100% totally was.
Right. And in fact, the very nature of the thing that we love from his work, which is you can't see the scary thing, therefore it is even more scary, is literally the reason that worked for him was because what he was referencing was like a fear of people who didn't look like him.
Yeah.
Like it was this external threat to his way of life or whatever, which is super bad and stinky. And it's kind of, I'm going to take control of the podcast for a second. I'm going to rip away the outline. It's kind of, if you think about it, like the reverse of Tolkien. Because Tolkien, right? So like Lovecraft, bad dude, hated people who weren't white and really hated Jewish people. And he made this genre, and people after him were like, that's bad, dude, but we're going to take your genre and make it good, actually. And they made like good stuff from it and like divorced it from its crappy racist past. Tolkien created like all these archetypes of fantasy with Lord of the Rings and stuff. And when asked about like allegories or racial allegories or national allegories, he was like, I hate allegories. Don't talk to me. I didn't intend anything that came from it. So he was not consciously creating any stereotypes, but people took his stereotypes and then made bad racist things out of them. And so this is like the reverse. And I just think that's super neat.
Yeah. And like, if we're going to talk about cosmic horror, you kind of have to talk about H.P. Lovecraft. But honestly, I'm just going to give you the basic of what you need to know about him. And that's it, because I don't want to talk about him that much.
We want to know just enough to be able to dunk on him.
Yeah. And by no means is H.P. Lovecraft or his works the only examples or things that add to cosmic horror, especially as we know it today. It
Right.
is quite removed from Lovecraft at this point. So let me give you some context on Lovecraft before we get into the genre as a whole and why he is still the first person that we think of when we think about cosmic horror. And a hint is because cosmic horror is really hard to do,
Yeah.
and he did it well. So, here we go. So Howard Phillips Lovecraft, born 1890, died in 1937, was an American author who became known for the Cthulhu mythos, or the shared universe of all of his creatures and creations. He grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and his grandfather raised him to not only love classic literature, but would tell him, quote, weird stories that he would make up about, quote, winged creatures and, quote, low moaning sounds. No. Were the stories about low moaning sounds, or did they just involve them? Because the way that my resource phrased it made it sound like it was about low moaning sounds.
Yeah, there are two. Everybody knows the two scariest creatures in all of horror. Winged creatures, like the Furies and the Jersey Devil, our good friend, and the other scariest one, low moaning sounds.
Yeah. So he began to create his most known works in 1920 with the beginning of the Cthulhu mythos, which is based on the ongoing idea of the great old ones, who are these ancient and powerful deities that once ruled the earth but have since put it into a death-like sleep from which they are supposed to never awaken, but spoiler alert, they do.
They always do. Those dang old ones, they never stay asleep like the way that they're supposed to. Also, this is a really cool link to, this is Devin's conspiracy theory corner where I talk about people who have conspiracy theories. There's this idea that dumb people have where because all these different fantasy and horror genres talk about like an old one or an old god or a Satan character, that they're all talking about the same character. And so like people with like QAnon are like, well, Lovecraft talked about old elder god, so everybody who talks about old elder god must also know that we're drinking the blood of children or whatever.
Yeah. And Lovecraft has a weird connection to QAnon that I'll get into in a second.
Yes.
But so in some part of the Cthulhu mythos, these gods need to be appeased somehow through sacrifice or worship in order to keep them asleep. And there's literally over 100 characters in the shared universe of Lovecraft stories. Far too many to get into, and far too many that I would like to get into.
Oh, yeah.
So I just want to talk about Cthulhu, the poster boy, very briefly.
Ooh, I read that in the outline as Post Boy Cthulhu, which now I really want. If we have any artists, there are two requests I have. One, Cthulhu dressed up as like a mailman.
Okay.
And two, there's a shirt from Dragon Ball Z that Piccolo, the green guy, wears that is just yellow and it says Post Boy across the front. And I want Cthulhu to wear that as well.
So Cthulhu is said to resemble an octopus, a dragon, and a caricature of a human. So it's like a human body form, and it's got the head of an octopus, sort of. Like, not the head of an octopus, but an octopus for a head.
Right.
Kind
it's
of.
like the Davy Jones from
Yes.
Pirates of the Caribbean, but with, like, less of a human face.
Yeah. And then, like, big dragon wings.
Big dragon wings. That's important. Make sure you get those dragon wings in there.
Hundreds of meters tall with webbed human kind of arms and legs. And he's kind of the one that sort of stood the test of time of all, like, everybody knows Cthulhu.
Everybody knows this guy. This guy? You talk about Cthulhu? We all know him. Yeah, I go down to the pop fountain down in Main Street, and I say, hey, you heard of this boy? And I hold up a poster with just like some squiggly lines on the head and a big eye, and they're like, oh, Cthulhu, we love that guy. We love him and his japes.
Lovecraft's other creatures, like the cosmic horror, like fans will know about, and a lot of horror fans, but Cthulhu is kind of the one that like everybody is familiar with. I don't know why in particular Cthulhu is the one.
Because he's sexy. Next question.
It's probably because the story, The Call of Cthulhu, that Lovecraft wrote was probably one of his most famous works and most well-written ones. And he's also pretty well known because they're in the 80s, somebody wrote a Call of Cthulhu tabletop role-playing game called Call of Cthulhu, which
One of
I've
the
heard
best.
is very fun. People still play it. I've never played, but I hear it's great. And then he's also made a lot of like cameos in like film and TV of like gags and stuff, which like underplays it because but whatever.
The way you're talking about this makes it seem like Cthulhu, like I was saying, is just a dude. Like he's just a dude who's around.
At this point, yeah.
And he just like sometimes does cameos in film and TV.
Yeah. He hasn't had a front seat in something until Lovecraft Country, the HBO show,
Right.
came out. And even then, he doesn't even really have a front seat.
Yeah, and he doesn't, he's a little bit ashamed. Some people have like bad, stinky parents who do bad things, and he kind of feels that way. So he's kind of spending his life trying to right those wrongs,
Yeah. Some of other Lovecraft stories were The Rats in the Walls, At the Mountains of Madness, The Shadow over
The
Innsmouth,
Shadow over Innsmouth.
and The Shadow Out of Time. I like all of these titles because it's very much like a fantasy and thing of like at the blank of blank or a blank of blank or the blank of blank. Just insert whatever
It
you
looks
want
like
in there.
he saw a meme on Facebook that was like, "What's your Lovecraft title? What month were you born? What day?" And then he did it with like all his friends.
By the way,
people he
don't do
thinks-
those because that's how spam accounts gets your security
yeah.
information.
That's true. But he did it with all the people he thinks are his friends. But joke's on him. He doesn't have any friends. Nobody likes him.
He also wrote Reanimator, which is not really a cosmic horror story, so we won't really be talking about it. But
every time I hear that name,
like
I think it's like an anime about mechs,
There could a Reanimator anime would be very good.
Say that, but Reanimator anime.
I'm kind of just putting it out there. That's frankly all I want to say, and all you really need to know about Lovecraft. Because the whole thing about Lovecraft's like racism is that I think in the past 5 years it's really come to light. I specifically remember when like the tweet or the Tumblr post about the slur that he named his cat came out, and everyone was like, "Oh, this guy might like." And look back and went, "Oh my God, this." And not everybody's and like scholars obviously knew that he was racist,
Known
but I think
for a long time,
yeah, colloquially we all kind of reckoned with it then. But so many of his themes, like not even just like references or characters or stuff that he said, but the very themes of his writing come from racist reactionary anxieties about the decline of the West and like, quote, civilized humanity falling to barbarism. That's his whole thing, is that all of Lovecraft's stories are about the world not just ending, but like falling to this like primitive state. And that's deeply informed by his racism and his anti-Semitism. Thankfully, that's one part of cosmic horror that most have left behind. Like, really, people focus about the whole like unfathomable aspect, and those kind of racist and reactionary anxieties are exactly the kind of conspiracy stuff that you see on websites like QAnon.
Right. I think that the kind of re-emergence of like kind of geek culture in like the early or the late aughts and the early 2010s, with like the re-emergence of D&D and frickin' Big Bang Theory and Joe Manganiello, all those guys kind of also came with a revival of Lovecraftian horror as a kind of cult following. And longtime Lovecraft fans know that he was a garbage person. And so there was kind of a rise of new people who were learning about the work and kind of idolizing Lovecraft because of the quality of his work. And so there was kind of a rediscovery of all of his bad stuff. And it actually dovetails really interestingly with the debate around author intent and death of the author that was also happening among people who share a lot of the Venn diagram of Lovecraft fans and like Harry Potter fans has a pretty big overlap. And so there was a lot of discussion about the way we look at author intent. And there was a beautiful blog, and if I find it, I'll put it in the description, about why Lovecraft being a racist and an anti-Semite is important, because when you read his work critically, like you said, it is foundational. It is inherently political writing. Every single piece of his writing is. And I think that it's Lovecraft fans are kind of the best fans of modern fantasy in the fact that every single person who loves Lovecraft like a lot will talk just as long about how much they hate Lovecraft and what he stood for, while talking about how much they love the worlds he created. And those things are in conflict. They conflict with each other and they contradict each other. But Lovecraft fans are like, yes, those contradictions exist, and I'm going to live with them and make them fight all the time because that's part of enjoying art critically.
Yeah, and not to like ruin H.P. Lovecraft or Lovecraftian horror, I should say. I can ruin H.P. Lovecraft for you, but not to ruin Lovecraftian horror for you, because like these stories were revolutionary for the subgenre. They're good, but when you look at them and like kind of it's uncomfortable to go back and look at them, and that uncomfortableness is important in order to be able to leave behind the themes that are gross.
Yeah, I think the phrase like ruining art, when you find out that a creator is problematic or just offensive, is kind of lacking a lot of nuance, because I think like obviously on one end of the spectrum you have, it was a different time, which is bull, because Lovecraft was crazy racist even for the time. Yeah. But there's definitely a middle ground where like, yes, the creator was a garbage human being. The work he did was great, and that is hard. That's like a difficult thing. It's when a bad person makes incredible art, you have to reckon with the fact that that happened and that the art may still be worth it. Like, not worth a person being garbage, but the art existing might be okay today, especially that the guy's dead and in the ground. Like, it's a difficult subject, and I think going, oh, well, now this thing is ruined, I'm never gonna read it again, is, I mean, that's a personal choice for a lot of people, but I think that there's a critical reckoning that you can totally do. I think we just don't like we want all art to be leisure and have no work involved, but sometimes art has like mental work involved that you need to do. When you read Lovecraft, you may be like, oh, it's super scary. I should think a little bit about the political implications of this scary outside force ruining Western civilization.
Yeah, exactly. Go like look at Lovecraft critically if you do look at it, and recognize those themes. But quite frankly, that's the most important thing about like looking at his work today, and that's all I want to talk about him. I would love to talk about now kind of what cosmic horror is now, because it has changed from it's left a lot of those problematic themes in the past. So let's talk a little about what we see in modern cosmic horror, the kind of codifiers and the main themes. And that's what's unique about cosmic horror, is that what it unites it as a horror subgenre is its themes. Not it's necessarily its creatures or villains. Like slashers are united by story structure and villains, and like zombie movies are united by a creature. Cosmic horror is united by very abstract themes.
Yeah, it can't be united by characters.
Yeah. So one of the biggest themes that we see is like misanthropy, the general dislike of the human race, and the belief that humans are insignificant compared to the vastness of the universe, which is also something we see in like a lot of like space movies, stuff like 2001: A Space Odyssey. But it's that instead of treating that insignificance as like wonder, it's treated as horror and treated as like, well, look how like terrible humans are, even in the vast scope of like how much we don't matter. Look at how much we think we matter and how much we suck at existing.
Oh, yeah. And there's some cosmic horror that also, and it's some of my favorite, that kind of flips that and is like, we are insignificant and that is horrifying, but that is also like empowering people to inherently be good in spite of it, which is also very cool. Playing with misanthropy is definitely it's good, and man.
For a lot of people, the realization of just how small we are is already horrifying. Like for some people, that might be very wonderful and cool, but for others, it's very scary. Yeah. It's like being in the open ocean sort of feeling. Also, the idea of forbidden knowledge, just in general. So the idea of something being literally unknowable, or something being so horrible that knowing it induces like some form of insanity. That's probably what most people think of when they think of cosmic horror.
Yeah. It rings, along with the misanthropy point, it rings of kind of religious allegory in a really thoughtful and interesting way of like I've read a few. I read some cosmic horror to prepare for this, and again, if I remember where I was reading stuff, I will put it in the description. But this idea that really links to a lot of modern religion of giving humans significance, and how that is very comforting for people to have, whether or not like the further implications of religion past the individual. And the forbidden knowledge comes into that because, you know, for a lot of people that start out their lives religious and become unreligious, the realization, the forbidden quote unquote knowledge in some people's minds of there is nothing after death is for a lot of religious people fucking horrifying. Like, that is the reason a lot of people remain religious individually, and that is like totally fair and healthy for those people. And it is just like, it's cosmic horror is so fascinating in the way, like we said, that it shares themes, not creatures. Like when creatures are used for horror, they often embody certain things, and that's where the interest comes in. Of like, what does this zombie represent? What does the vampire represent? Which we've talked a lot about. But in cosmic horror, the themes are just like front and center. Like you don't even need to do the allegory bit, which is
the
so
villain
cool.
in cosmic horror is not necessarily the antagonist or like the whatever creature it is. It is the horror itself.
Yes.
Which is crazy. And speaking of that, like the delicateness of sanity, air quote, like whatever we consider sanity to be.
Yeah. How fragile it is.
Yeah, and how many characters in cosmic horror are unable to process or even comprehend the things they witness, hear, or discover, and therefore go mad in some way trying to cope with it, which is like a little removed from actual human fears, but is scary nonetheless.
Right. It's the kind of, it's the thin line of like, if the world, it's the idea of like, if the world was a little bit crazier, I would go mad. Or if I just knew, like if the world is that crazy and I just don't know it.
Yeah.
Like I just haven't been shown that yet.
I think part of that too is that as an audience member, reading or watching it and seeing a character go mad at the sight or the thought of something, the fact that like we can't go like, oh, I understand why they went mad because we can't see the thing either.
Right. And we talked at the beginning of the podcast about like how it's hard to do cosmic horror visually and how it really works in writing because you're like reading something is just thought. Like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so you're reading about a character, you're mentally conceiving of a character who's thinking something terrifying. And so you, by being one step removed from that, you can't quite conceive of what they're conceiving of.
Yeah.
Which, that's so good.
And what you can imagine is always going to be scarier than what
Worse,
somebody can create.
Of course.
This one's a little less like deep, but like instead of blood and guts in cosmic horror, we get a lot of like viscera. We get like goo. Like, cosmic horror is not bloody or gory usually, but we do get some goo sometimes.
We do get some goo. I think I may take over this podcast for an episode to talk about Neon Genesis Evangelion because I just rewatched it again. And there's a lot of cosmic, most of that show is pretty cosmic horror-y. And there's a fluid that stands in for blood in that show, which is called LCL, but it's orange, and so a lot of the fans just call it Tang. And that's what a lot of the viscera in cosmic horror becomes to me. It's just goo. It's just the, like, green goo you would buy at Toys R Us.
Yeah.
Like, it's just Sunny D.
Yeah. Back to kind of like the more prominent themes is there's also a lot of the characters in cosmic horror tend to be somehow detached socially, either recluses or they're just introverted or socially isolated because they're very academic. And this is also, we kind of veer into a slightly like problematic trope territory of like the the introverted academic being like, oh, I am introverted because because I'm so smart, I am above socialness.
And
While
it's not because I'm just a dick.
yeah, while in reality, most of the time, like well done cosmic horror, the reason they are not socially isolated because they are academic. They are academic because they are socially isolated.
Yes, and it's it's the difference between protagonist and there are very rarely heroes in cosmic horror.
Mm-hmm.
And often the protagonist is somebody that certain parts of an audience are meant to identify with, but not in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is something that most media wants you to do in a positive way, that you're like, oh, I identify with this guy because he's heroic and he's whatever. And in cosmic horror, you identify with the character, but you hate that you do.
Yeah. And that's the thing, too, about these characters is that in a lot of cosmic horror, especially if you're going to go Lovecraftian, these characters aren't going to make it to the end, either alive or sane or both.
Right.
Because we talk about like the next point I have is helplessness and hopelessness, that characters in cosmic horror are often unable to escape their fate, and many just merely accept it in the name of nihilism or whatever. And that's sometimes the only way to escape whatever, like a lot of cosmic horror is a fate worse than death. So the only way to escape it is by dying or by going insane.
Yeah.
Like I know in when you play Call of Cthulhu, your whole a TPK in Call of Cthulhu is usually pretty good because that usually means that you won if everybody's dead by the end. It usually means that you stopped whatever was going on. So cosmic horror is depressing and fatalistic, and that's I think what makes it very unique. Not in the way that like Hereditary is about grief and that being depressing, but it's depressing as in like it so couldn't happen and yet it is actively happening in you at the same time.
Yeah,
the existential dread, which is one of the worst feelings just in the world, and something that I think in the past 4 years and the past year, especially in the United States, a lot of people have been feeling. It's a terrible feeling, the feeling of being powerless to change anything, while the antagonist could wipe out the earth as swiftly as swatting a fly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the horror comes from.
Yeah, and it's also where the kind of like cosmic horror achieves a form of catharsis that is so uniquely powerful today. Like you think about like Greeks going to see Antigone and at the end everybody's dead, and that's like so freaking heavy, and then they leave and that gets to leave them. And with cosmic horror it's kind of the same thing, where you're like, we are so tiny, we are alone, this is terrifying, we could be wiped out in a heartbeat, and then you close the book and you're like, phew, okay.
But then also sometimes you sit with that.
Oh yeah, and sometimes you sit with it, but it gives you an opportunity to experience that fear in some ways a safe way. Yeah. It's fiction. Like that it's so good.
There's also a couple of other common occurrences and tropes in cosmic horror, less themes, more tropes. Usually the antagonist, if you're wondering like, is this thing I'm watching cosmic horror? Look out for these. Usually the antagonist will have some kind of cult or worshipers that are trying to awaken them. There will usually be some like charismatic cult leader or kind of like the leader of like the mad people or the insane people or whatever that are trying to awaken the thing, whatever the thing is. We see that in a lot of movies. Merely being near or seeing the antagonist can drive the heroes to madness, and that antagonist is literally indescribable, with many narrators flat out saying that they cannot describe the horrors that they saw, only that what it made them feel, or like sounds or smells.
Which as a writing mechanic, that is so incredible.
Yeah, because then it also acknowledges the character's role as the narrator.
Right.
By saying, like, I can't describe what I saw to you.
How many times in a book does somebody describe, like, obviously they recall smells, but, like, how often is that recalling of a smell scary? Like,
yeah. Like, that's all you get. And the antagonist, sometimes the arrival of the antagonist is preventable, but there's usually some great price to pay by dying or whatever, or you may only be able to put it off, not stop it entirely. So then the moral question comes of why do it? Like, do I sacrifice myself just to put off what's going to happen eventually anyway, et cetera, et cetera. And then the antagonist is usually able to communicate with humanity somehow, but usually in some kind of like backwards, bizarre way, or only able to deliver cryptic messages, usually not converse, but somehow send out messages of like, I am coming. So why is cosmic horror so hard to make, and why do we still think of H.P. Lovecraft first and not anything else?
Because in the Transformers movie, the bad guy is like Galactus, and you can see him, and that's why it's bad.
I mean, basically, yeah. But like we talked about before, one of the biggest markers of cosmic horror is the antagonist being the unfathomable, capital U, unfathomable. Like something too visually complicated or contradicting or impossible or horrifying to understand, something so horrible that your eyes literally cannot process it. And I don't care how good you are. There is no creature designer in the world that can come up with something visual for that. That's the whole point of it. As soon as you see it, it becomes less scary because your brain can process it. No creature designer can create something that is unprocessable yet. Maybe there's somebody out there who can. But like not like Guillermo del Toro can't do it. He can do anything. He can't do this.
He can't do this. Guillermo del Toro can do anything
else,
but he can't do this.
If you give it a shape, it's not unknowable anymore, and that defeats the entire point of it.
Right.
So there are movies that have done this and have done this well. So movies like Bird Box, which is simply fine. Come for me all you want. I think it's simply fine.
Capital F. Fine.
I enjoyed watching it. It was just fine. So Bird Box does as well by never showing us the monster or the creature, even though we see what like happens to people after they see it, because like if you haven't seen the movie, whatever they see is so horrible that it drives people to suicide upon seeing them. We never see what they look like, and we get the kind of Bird Box is actually a pretty good example of cosmic horror because we even get the kind of mad cult with the Greg, I think is his name, like the crazy guy who
right.
tries to make everybody see, like the people that have gone mad by seeing the creatures can still look at them, and they try and get other people to look. And we see he has like these drawings of what the creatures look like, or he thinks they look like, and even then they're contradicting. They don't all make sense. They're kind of just scribbles.
Yeah, it goes back to the religion thing. It goes to like visual depictions of angels. It very much feels like that. And
it's probably the best move that this movie does is not show the creatures and have that kind of thing, which is what drives me. That's the one thing that drives me crazy about A Quiet Place, because that's a movie I otherwise love. Not only did they try to explain the creatures too much, but they showed them, which automatically made it less scary for me. Like, I think I love A Quiet Place. I think it would have been way better if they had not shown the creatures.
Right.
We don't need to look at, like, we don't need it.
Yeah.
The concept is already scary enough. We don't need to see them.
Yeah. I have a brief point, because the nature of movies could be a very effective vehicle for something like this, where you are not showing it, and that's something that you follow through to the end. There comes a problem with the culture in which movies are created, which is generally Devin's leftist corner, driven by a profit incentive. So what you have is, in order for your movie to be considered successful, people have to see it. In order for people to see it, you need to market it. In order to market it, you need something about it that is marketable. And for a lot of horror movies, there is not the appetite for a movie for whom the mystery is the marketing ploy. You may think that there is, because it sounds like a good marketing idea to be like, find out what it is. But the truth is, nobody goes to see it because they want to know what the monster is.
It's why the second half of the movie was way less scary than the first half.
Right.
Even the scene, like, because the scene where the creatures are like stalking the house and she's giving birth in the bathtub, great scene, excellent scene, well done. Not as scary as the first half of the movie.
For sure.
But movies have shown the creature without showing the creature in a cosmic horror sense, and have done it well.
Jaws.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Jaws, because the shark didn't work, so they had to show it less. And it's cosmic horror because it's a shark that's stronger than they're supposed to be.
Okay. That's not quite what I was thinking of. I was thinking more in the terms of like, so with it and Pennywise. So Pennywise the dancing clown, scary. But Pennywise the dancing clown is not its true form. Whenever we see it, we're not looking at it. We're looking at it taking the form of something else. We see different shapes or different fears, or even sometimes in transitional phrases like transforming into something else. But we never actually see what his true form looks like. And that's for the better, I think.
Yeah, and I do think that it might be better pulled off in the book.
Yes.
Though, because it is something where I feel like in the movie, it's much easier for an audience member to mistake the clown or whatever form it's currently taking as Pennywise,
That's it,
as the being. And yet, like in the book, you understand fully that it is whatever is scary to you. So while the character is seeing a clown, you are seeing something different. Whether whether you know it or not.
Yeah, and the only hint we get of it is when the characters look into the deadlights and they like check, like they lose their autonomy, they like check out, which is like a form of like madness in a cosmic horror sense.
Right.
That the deadlights, which people say is like its true form, but like even when, which is why it works better in the book than in the movie, because in the movie it's literally just lights.
You see them,
book, yeah. But we imagine that the characters are looking at something else because it causes them to just.
And the idea of like a blank. Kind of mental checking out is a really interestingly different and effective form of madness, I think, as well.
Yeah.
It is interesting cosmic horror. Good job.
Yeah, and The Thing does this too, because even in The Thing, we never see what the thing actually is. We only see it transitioning in between trying to impersonate people.
Right.
We never actually see what it looks like. So that's a way to do it and also kind of not do it. And the main reason why cosmic horror is so hard, not even from a creature sense, is that existential dread is a very hard thing to portray on film, like as an actor, as a writer, as a director, because it's so much based in the inner monologue, and we don't get that as much in a film. Like we maybe see it on an actor's face, but we don't get all of it.
Right. And it's not just individual thoughts, which I think a lot of movies attempt to portray via an actor's performance. It is the progression, like you said, the inner monologue. It's the progression of thought. It's following one thought to the next, to the next, to the next. Being able to follow that thread is the important thing to be able to understand dread.
Yeah. And it's so much more complicated than like joy or anger because it's not nearly as tangible, and it creates a different response in every person.
Existential dread could not be a character in Pixar's Inside Out.
Yeah, because it can induce despair or it can induce like joyful nihilism, like, and it depends. I think the only movie that I've seen that does this well is Annihilation, which I know people are on the fence as to whether or not that's a horror movie, but I think
I have a lot of thoughts about that movie.
I think Natalie Portman does this kind of that scene where she's like the creature and they're like emulating each other, and like she doesn't talk to it, but you can kind of see it on her face. I think that's a scene that does it well, but I can't think of any other examples of films doing this well.
I really like that example though. I think Annihilation is an example of, remember when we talked about how there's nuance in art, and that usually when we talk about it on the internet through the lens of like problematicness, that it loses that nuance. Man, Annihilation is a movie like that, because everybody was like, what about, oh my God, Cain has it now, and they're going to have a kid, and they're going to be and then they're going to take it. It's a movie about grief portrayed through visual metaphor. It's literally just art that you have to, you're not.
When it ends, it ends.
It ends. It's not, we're not setting up an Annihilation 2 Return of the Shimmer. Like, what are you talking about?
And some other examples of cosmic horror appearing in other horror films that aren't necessarily cosmic horror films. Cabin in the Woods does this and does it pretty well because it plays with every other horror trope and subgenre in the universe. Of course, it's going to dive into cosmic horror. It's pretty much head first in the final scene where we find, spoiler alert, where we find out that the reason the facility is sacrificing these people is that they're trying to appease the, quote, ancient ones.
Right.
And if they don't, the ancient ones will return and destroy the earth. And what's so crazy to me about this movie is that in the end, the main characters choose not to sacrifice themselves for humanity and instead let the ancient ones destroy the world, which is very Lovecraftian in the end there.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy because they're going to die anyway. It's
but
crazy.
that answer, like that answer at the core of every, like, letting the ancient ones destroy the world or putting it off for a little bit by sacrificing yourself, that is like the thing that you can go either way on. Like it is a question to which arguments can be made both ways, which is like the best way to end your story, in my opinion.
And not to like do exactly what Devin just said he hated, but like also I guess because the whole facility is dead now, that even if they chose to sacrifice themselves, nobody, like the next time around, the facility's gone. There wouldn't be anybody to do it.
Right. That's, yeah.
Anyway, the Final Destination franchise also
finally
kind of does. I love these movies, by the way. Even the bad ones. They kind of do this because the antagonist in the Final Destination films is literally death. And we never see death. And the first two movies do like a weird thing where like death is like the water or the wind, but we never see it except for when somebody dies. And it's missing that, like death is unfathomable, but it's kind of missing that sort of the characters reckoning with death being unfathomable.
Yeah, in the original pitch, it was going to be the death from Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, but they couldn't get the rights from Cartoon Network, so they kind of had to work around it.
Phil Lamar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the where it kind of veers out of cosmic horror is that they spend the whole franchise explaining how it works and like, oh, if like you save somebody else, you get moved up in the line, and then it goes back around. Like that's the rest of the movie is them trying to figure out how it works, which is not very cosmic. But you know, it's there. And of course, Lovecraft Country. The HBO show.
Country, my favorite Cedar Fair park.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about that term because they didn't just call the show that. That was a term that existed before the show.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a trope that usually refers to a dark, twisted version of New England. Only New England because that's where Lovecraft based most of his stories, because it's where he was from. Yeah. Usually Massachusetts or Rhode Island. In towns that look boring and mediocre at first, but are often populated by hidden monsters, aliens, or other things that are not quite human.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about this in the past, that like it's also the oldest place in America. Mm-hmm. So like in terms of white America. So it's the place in which the most like crazy stuff can happen, especially when you think about like there was a time of early settlement where a lot of people just died, and we don't know exactly how because people didn't keep records. And so like there's a lot of mystery there. There's also the like very also obvious thing that it is easy to write a story about how you hate immigrants when you set it in a place that is the oldest place in America, but also where most immigrants arrive.
Yeah.
But that's it. We're not talking about Lovecraft anymore. That was it.
Yeah, because besides Lovecraft, the person who uses this most is Stephen King.
Right.
He puts it in Maine, but you know, it's the same thing. It's these monsters hiding in this like American town or whatever. Sometimes it's in upstate New York or in the Pine Barrens, New Jersey.
The correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not there as often.
It's always correct in upstate New York, to be fair.
It's usually somewhere in the Northeast. But Lovecraft Country, the show, moves it to the rural South, which also shares a lot of these kind of like core elements already. And to full disclosure about Lovecraft Country, I have not seen the whole series. I've only seen the first 2 episodes. I'm sorry. I'm really bad at keeping up with TV shows. Anybody who knows that, I finished like 2 TV shows in my life. Well, and if they have like 5 episodes. I'm so bad at finishing.
You're going to have to finish Ava, so.
Yeah, I'm going to have to finish this. But I do know that some of his monsters do appear in the show. And from what I've heard, although the show uses the Cthulhu mythos as kind of like their folklore, it's not necessary. It's more Lovecraftian than it is cosmic horror. Probably because we see many of the antagonists kind of head on. But again, I don't want to speak too much on it because I have not seen all of it and therefore would probably say something wrong. But from what I've seen it's excellent. I've heard that it like gets less excellent, which is disappointing, but I hope that that's not true and I enjoy it. Also, though, from what I've heard, if you enjoy Lovecraft Country, and I'm just going to stick a book rec in the end here, you will really, 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 really enjoy Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. I just finished it, and I have been literally recommending it to everyone I know. It is a body horror and cosmic horror and fantasy novella about 3 women that just wreck shop on the KKK and monsters with swords and guerrilla warfare. It is so good. And it's a novella too, so like it never slows down. It's like exactly the correct length. It's so good. Oh my God, please read it. Please read it.
There's no combination of words that can get me to read something as quickly as 3 women, swords, guerrilla warfare, and the fact that the KKK will be at the bottom of it.
Yeah, and
I'm so in.
It's so good. Please read it. It's excellent. But yeah, and that is a kind of like, not to like bring it around, but like this story and Lovecraft Country existing based on the works of Lovecraft is an example of how we can take some of the good things, like writing wise, that Lovecraft created, and then leave the more problematic aspects of it in the past. Even though some of those problematic aspects were kind of a core aspect of it, it is still possible to leave those.
And to not only leave them, but to create with them in mind.
Yeah.
Like to take Lovecraft Country and set it in the South, set it with people of color in main roles, and set it with a white supremacist organization as the enemy.
Yeah.
That's not leaving it behind. That is taking it and confronting it, which is what Lovecraft fans be doing all the time. Hell yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice kind of like finisher for it.
Yeah.
Read that book, please, and do tell me if you enjoyed it, because it's so good.
Yeah, read that book. Also watch Neon Genesis Evangelion. We'll probably do an episode about it in like 2-3 weeks. It's all on Netflix. I'd recommend the sub, not the dub, because the dub is fine, but it's by Netflix and it's not as good as the original. So do that. Also watch the movie End of Evangelion, which is very important to our eventual definitely happening episode. This has been The Great American Scream. If you enjoyed, please leave a rate and review on iTunes or follow us on Spotify. You can also tell a friend about the show. It's the best way to spread the word. And Adam, can you pimp our social medias, please?
Yes, you can check us out on Facebook at The Great American Scream, or more frequently on Instagram and Twitter at Great Scream Pod. Let us know your favorite cosmic horror stories, movies, other good examples that you have seen or really enjoy, especially literature. And read, ring shout, tell me if you like it. You can tweet at us or post by using the hashtag TGAS. And as always, if there is something that you would like to hear about on the show, let us know, because your suggestion may become the subject of a future episode.
Yay! Special thank you goes out to Michael Segudo, who does the intro for the show, as well as Stevie Viola, who does the intro and outro music. And we have a Patreon at www.patreon.com/GreatScreamPod. You can get tons of great rewards there. Adam posts the outlines all the time. We do polls monthly. People suggest episode topics, and it's a really fun time.
Yeah.
So
I've been really enjoying chatting with y'all about just like the things that we talk about. Like that's been great. It's been really fun. And
really,
thank you
really fun.
Again so much for supporting us there. It really helps out. It helps us keep the show running, and it's really, we love talking to y'all. So
yeah. So thank you to our current patrons, Ben, Eric, Casper, Bree, Gail, Joyce, Brucker, Melinda, and Chris.
Woo-hoo.
I've been Devin Wright.
I've been Adam O'Connell.
And hopefully you have been spooked. Oh, it's Cthulhu.
Sorry, I wasn't gonna say anything, because whatever our listeners imagine is gonna be scarier than what I came up with.
But no, Cthulhu just I called him a little bit ago, and he's here now. He's late to the show, but subscribe on Patreon.
Dr. Zoidberg.
That's him. Do something safely, I guess.